Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Martin Eskejian. I'm the son of the architect and the builder of this building and the museum down below. Today is honoring my parents, Luther and Anna Eskejian. Yesterday was my mom's birthday. She would have been 96. And my dad, 5 years, he's been gone. My two sisters are here, Nancy and Carol. You want to stand up for a second? And we're just very thankful that this edifice is here and that the museum is living on. Thanks to Maggie Goshen for keeping it all running, and that's why we're gathered here today. This event is co-sponsored by NASR, and so it's a AEM and NASR event. And I'll introduce the speaker in 1 minute. If you have a cell phone, please put it on silent at this time. Thank you very much. A couple of the upcoming events before I introduce the speaker. On the 15th of April, that's a Sunday, tax day, the legacy of Swiss humanitarian Jacob Kunzler, who was a missionary, and he was in Urfa, which is now Turkey, who witnessed the genocide events firsthand. And this is a book about him and his life and what he saw. So that's the 15th of April, 4 o'clock downstairs in the museum. The following Sunday, the 22nd, the Armenians and Islam, Images for a Brighter History of the Armenians, and the publication of the book, The Armenians in Medieval Islamic World, Paradigms of Interaction in the 7th to 14th Centuries by Seta Dodoyan, and it's about her new book. I'm glad you're all here today. We have a very, very special speaker who's considered, I think, the foremost Armenian genocide scholar in the world, Dr. Vahan Dadrian, who is currently the Director of Research at the Zorian Institute, a pioneer in the fields of genocide theory and comparative genocide. He's the author of several books, including The History of Armenian Genocide, Ethnic Conflict from the Balkans to Anatolia and the Caucasus, and recently published a book called Judgment at Istanbul, The Armenian Genocide Trials, co-authored with a Turkish individual, Taner Akam, as well as more than 70 articles in numerous languages around the world. He is a recipient of many honors and awards, notably and including the Korinsky Medal, which is Armenia's highest cultural award given. He was inducted into the ranks of the Academy of Sciences of the Republic of Armenia in 1998. In the 1970s, he helped to develop the field of comparative study of genocide, bringing to his work the interdisciplinary perspectives that join sociology, history, and law, enriched further by his ability to draw upon half a dozen languages that he speaks fluently. He is the foremost scholar of the Armenian genocide, having devoted more than 30 years to research on virtually every aspect of it. The culmination of his work was published in 1995, The History of the Armenian Genocide. It's a rare work, over 20 years to make and to write this book. It's a fascinating read, and it's comprehensive in scope and unsurpassed in the documentation of the events it describes. So without any further ado, Professor Dadrian will now speak.
Music.
Oh, music. We have the music first. Sorry. So now we have the music. So, music.
Կոմիտաս վարդապետ, ով զարմանալի, այսօր ձայնին հայրական։ translating from Taiwan. Vercina Citerna.
without further ado, Professor Dadrian will speak on the Armenian genocide and the extraordinary role of Deir ez-Zor Governor Zeki Bey. Professor Dadrian.
Just a few words in Armenian. Herkeli հայրենակիցներ, կսաղմին որ իմ բաշտելի մայրին լեզով չի բիգրնամ խոսիլ, որ դիզի որ մեզ մասի անգլիա խոսել, ուրեմն անգլիերեն պիտի խոսիլ. Today's major topic is the Armenian genocide with a special reference to a particular organizer of the Armenian genocide, namely Salih Zeki. In order to understand the importance of this man, we have to compare it to the Armenian genocide in relation to the Jewish Holocaust by the Nazis. In the organization of the Jewish Holocaust, Hitler played a major role in decision-making, but the organization of the Holocaust was entrusted to Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS and the Secret Service, the Gestapo. I think a similar parallel can be established with respect to Salih Zeki. As Talat was the main organizer and decision maker of the Armenian genocide, the implementation, the execution of the massacres had two particular aspects. With respect to one of them, Salih Zeki played a major role. As you know, in the Armenian genocide, there were several stages and phases of extermination. In the first phase, in the first stage, the male folk, the male population of the Armenian inhabitants of Turkey were eliminated to facilitate the elimination of the rest of the Armenian people, namely women, children, and old men. And I would maintain that, contrary to many studies of the Armenian genocide, a very important aspect of the Armenian genocide has thus far been neglected, namely the elimination of the survivors of the massacres in the deserts of Mesopotamia, in Aleppo and the surrounding area. And here, the main topic of my discussion, Salih Zeki, played a major role. He was Kaymakam, governor of Kayseri, and Talat, Interior Minister Talat, was very impressed with the efficiency, with which Salih Zeki eliminated the Armenian population of Kayseri. I think the massacres of Kayseri Armenians is one of the most bloodthirstiest episodes of the Armenian genocide. And this impressed Talat. And contrary to the expectations of Talat and the rest of the organizing people of the Armenian genocide, they were surprised that after the harrowing stages of deportation, so many Armenians survived the treks of deportation and arrived in the deserts of Mesopotamia. Talat was truly astounded that so many old Armenian men, women, and children could survive the treks of deportation. And as you know, the treks of deportation were deliberately made such that very few Armenians would survive. Of course, in the first stage of the Armenian genocide was the bloodiest aspect of it, namely the massacre on the spot of the male population. A very important part of the Armenian male population was eliminated to the war ministry. As you know, at the proclamation of a holy war and general mobilization in the fall of 1914, all males in the age group of 20 to 45 were conscripted by the Ottoman army. And it is very little known that the very first phase of the Armenian genocide involved the massacre and destruction of the Armenian male conscripts in the Ottoman army. Stage by stage, they were removed to distant places, disarmed, and then executed by firing squads. Tens of thousands of young Armenian conscripts were eliminated in the first stage of the genocide. This had the function that the rest of the Armenian population became extremely defenseless. And here comes a major aspect of the Armenian genocide, namely the vulnerability of the victim population. All atrocities, whether it was in Holocaust during World War II or in the Armenian genocide World War I, people who organize mass murder become very functional. In other words, how to facilitate this mass murder with minimum cost, with maximum results. So therefore, in the Armenian genocide, the first functional aspect of it was the elimination of the male population. And the conscription in the armed forces facilitated this task. Armenian soldiers were disarmed, isolated from the rest of the army, and then executed block by army officers. So what was left then, Armenian women and children, and here, the deserts of Mesopotamia, particularly the area around Haleb and Deir ez-Zor, became very prominent in this task of mass murder. You have to imagine the terrible condition of the people who survived the treks of deportation, arrived in Deir ez-Zor, in the deserts of Mesopotamia, exhausted, weak, and extremely vulnerable to destruction. So therefore, Salih Zeki, who was the governor of Kayseri and impressed Talat with the efficiency with which he eliminated the population of Kayseri, was appointed as governor of Deir ez-Zor. He replaced the governor of Deir ez-Zor, who, contrary to the orders of Interior Minister Talat, could not be very cruel towards the survivor of the Armenians arriving in the Mesopotamian desert. In fact, he was very considerate. He provided housing, jobs, took care of the sick Armenian survivors, and Talat was indignant. Therefore, he was replaced by Salih Zeki. Salih Zeki is the case in many aspects of the Armenian genocide, had a personal grudge against the Armenians. Because in my research I established that his family, his relatives were victims of the massacres during which Greeks and Bulgarians engaged in massacres of Muslims of the Balkan Peninsula in the period of 1912-1913. And this is very interesting how sometimes the executions of the Armenian people had personal stories of revenge. Of course, in this case, his feelings of revenge were not specifically against Armenians, but against Christians, because Bulgarians and Greeks engaged in extensive massacres against Muslim populations of Greeks, Macedonia, and Bulgaria. And Salih Zeki was one of the victims. He lost several family members. And this is very interesting. transfer vindictiveness, revenge feelings from one Christian group to another. Armenians were not involved in the Balkan War. They had very little to do with the massacre of Muslims in Bulgaria and Greece. But this is interesting. With primitive people, they generalize. Greeks and Bulgarians were Christians, Armenians were Christians, therefore you can transfer your hatred from one Christian group to another. And this is very interesting. The personal family aspects in the organization of the Armenian genocide. So in studying the Armenian genocide, I would try to understand Salih Zeki by making a comparison with the case of the Holocaust of the Jews. As we all know, Hitler was the arch-organizer of the Holocaust. But in the implementation of the organization of the Holocaust, Heinrich Himmler played a major role in terms of the network of concentration camps in which the Jews were exterminated. And I think that we can make a parallel with Salih Zeki in the same aspect. Talat was the organizer, but the executioner of the Armenian massacres was mainly Salih Zeki. And therefore, I am very sorry to observe that in all studies of the Armenian genocide by Armenian historians, Salih Zeki is totally ignored, neglected. Nobody is speaking about them in the Armenian literature. And I think very soon I will come with a publication about the critical role of Salih Zeki as in my judgment, second in importance, second to Talat in terms of importance of organizing the genocide. Because as I said, contrary to Turkish expectations, multitudes of Armenian women and children, because of their rigorous health, were able to survive the exhausting treks of deportation, and to the great surprise of Talat, tens of thousands of Armenians arrived in Deir Zor as survivors. And so Salih Zeki's appointment as governor of Deir Zor is very important in terms of Turkish attempts to deal with this unexpected development that huge numbers of Armenians survived the deportations. Salih Zeki, as I said, had a personal grudge, not against Armenians, but against Christians in the Balkan Peninsula. And in Ottoman history, this is very easy. I think Turkish hatred against Armenians was in large measure a transfer of their hatred against Christian Bulgarians and Greeks in the Balkan Peninsula. Armenians did not engage in massacres against Turks. I don't know of any Armenian history prior to genocide where Armenians committed massacre against Turkish populations. But there was a history of massacres of Ottomans, of Turks in the Balkan Peninsula by Greeks and Bulgarians. And this is a very interesting aspect, the transfer of hatred from one Christian group to another. Of course, you know that even if they wanted to, Armenians were not able to engage in atrocities against Muslim populations. Why? Because for centuries, because of the prevalence of the Islamic Quranic law, non-Muslims, and in this case, hundreds of thousands of Armenians, were prohibited from bearing and carrying arms. Not even knives, they were not even allowed to have knives in them. So Armenians were very vulnerable, extremely vulnerable, devoid of any weapon. And I think in the study of the Armenian genocide, this aspect is a very critical element in analyzing the genocide. How vulnerability plays a major role in decision making. Because Talat is on record of saying that we hate the Bulgarians, the Greeks, even more than the Armenians. but there is a Bulgarian state, there is a Greek state, there are Muslim populations in Greece, and they can retaliate. But there is no Armenian state to retaliate against us. This is very important, the vulnerability aspect, the absence of a protective Armenian state to threaten to counteract our Turkish cruelties and massacres by reprisals. And I think we know that during World War I, when Armenian volunteers were able to retaliate, and it is a fact that we have to acknowledge that in Erzincan and Erzurum in 1917, Armenian soldiers from the Russian army carried out extensive massacres against Turks in Erzurum and in Erzincan. And I think this is very interesting that vulnerability is a better way of explaining the success of the Turks than just to say that Armenians were weak or Armenians were passive and unable to fight for their rights. It was not inability, it was disability, the disability of the Armenians to defend themselves. So therefore, in studying Salih Seki, I established the fact that the critical element throughout the history of the Armenian genocide has thus far been neglected in major studies of the Armenian genocide, namely the motivation for greed and possessiveness. I think it is my observation and conclusion that greed, possessiveness, played a major role in the decision to execute the genocide. More than hatred, more than sense of threat from the Armenians, it was the greed, the avarice, the prospect of reclaiming, repossessing the accumulated wealth of the Armenian population. This is a very neglected aspect of Armenian genocide studies. Possessiveness, greed, acquisitiveness played a major role than all other arguments that Armenians were a threat, that Armenians were provocating, etc., etc. 6 centuries of accumulated Armenian wealth is a major feature of the Armenian genocide, namely massive transfer of wealth from the victim population to the perpetrator group. Tens of thousands of Kurds, Turkish peasants, overnight became wealthy by reclaiming the possessions of their victims. And therefore, I maintain that the study of the Armenian genocide has a major economic aspect that has been thus far neglected, and always it has been a story of Christians with Muslims. More than Christianity, more than Armenian provocation, it was the greed of the Turks. They could not stand the fact that the subject population, Armenians were subject, Ottoman subjects, that the subjects were more wealthy than the dominant group, the Muslim Turks. And particularly, this became a major incentive for those people who, in my judgment, played greater role in the organization of the genocide than Turks proper, namely the Kurdish population. The Kurdish population played a more critical role in the organization and execution of the Armenian genocide than Turkish decision makers or Turkish governmental officials. In fact, the Turkish population was very negligible in the 6 Armenian provinces. There were very few Turks in Erzurum. Just the military in the garrisons of Erzurum and Erzincan. The vast majority of the population of Erzincan, Erzurum, Van, Bush Bitlis were Armenians. So there were very few Turks, but there was a massive Kurdish population. And I think this is another important feature of the Armenian genocide, the preeminent role of the Kurds, in contrast to the negligible number of Turkish officials. And I really think that Turks proper played a much less important role in the Armenian genocide than the Kurdish population of the 6 provinces. And this is a very important thing that now Kurdish scholars gradually coming to terms, and several of them now are citing me, Dadrian's arguments that the Kurds played a major role. And I'm convinced that if it not for the Kurds, I think today all these 6 provinces would be part of a greater Armenia. The greater enemy of the Armenian aspirations were not the Turks but the Kurdish population. And here again, economics played a major role. Armenians were wealthy, merchants, importers, exporters. The wealth of the 6 Armenian provinces mostly was concentrated in the hands of the Armenians. And you can see here that prosperity, economic strength is utterly useless if there is no power to support and protect that wealth. Armenians were wealthy, but were extremely vulnerable, extremely weak to defend themselves. This creates problems of greed, provocation, and I think the Armenian genocide must be focused on this very important problem, the economic angle in motivation for the genocide and the paramount role of the Kurds in contrast to the negligible role of the Turks. As I said, Turks were negligible in terms of numbers of population. Most people, Turkish people in these provinces were either military people or government officials. The Armenians had to deal with massive Kurdish populations. So, in examining now Salih's second stage of the genocide, namely the elimination of the survivors of the mass deportations, Salih Zeki used the same method that the Turkish government used in carrying out the genocide. Namely, whereas in the provinces of the Armenian Eastern Turkey, the historic Armenia, the convicts played a major role. Convicts, tens of thousands of convicts were released from the prisons as killer bands to carry out the actual details of massacre. In the Mesopotamian deserts where Salih Zeki had power, the major role that was played in the organization and execution of the genocide were the tribes of Salih Zeki. That is, in the late 19th century, the Ottoman government transferred tens of thousands of people from various parts of Turkey into the deserts of Mesopotamia. Therefore, these tribesmen were extremely hostile to the Christians because before the World War I deportations, they had experienced a similar problem at the hands of the Tsarist Russian government. In the middle and late 19th century, the Tsarist government did something that played a major role in the motivation of the Circassians of hatred against the Armenians. Namely, they were displaced and they were deported from the Caucasus area to the eastern provinces of Turkey. The Circassians were creating problems for the Tsarist regime. And therefore, they decided that the best way to get rid of them is to transfer. Tens of thousands of Circassians were expelled from the Caucasus, and they ended up in taking residence in the historically Armenian provinces of Erzurum, Erzincan, Van, Bitlis, Mush, Harput. Within 4 decades, tens of thousands of Circassians moved from Caucasus to the provinces which were inhabited by the Armenians. Friction developed, so they began to kill the Armenians because in the Ottoman Empire, because of the provisions of the Turkish Bible, the Quran, killing a Christian entitled them to sit in the paradise. This was this religious, naive belief that killing Armenians was holy war, part of holy war, therefore they would be rewarded in heaven. I think this played a major role in motivating these naive Circassians that this holy war would be rewarded in life after death. But as I maintain throughout my writings, more than religion, it was material greed, avarice, to take possession of the accumulated wealth of the Armenian population. And I think this makes even more understandable when we ask the hypothetical question, why was there not a similar attitude towards Greeks? And I think a Turkish historian explained this very interesting problem. Namely, they said that the Greeks had a state, there were large Muslim populations in Greece, in Crete, island of Crete. They could retaliate. They could massacre all the Muslims. But the Armenians, no protective Armenian state to retaliate. And therefore, I come to my major argument that I repeat in all my lectures. I think the vulnerability of the Armenian population, their defenselessness, played a major, decisive role in motivating the Turks and the Kurds to pounce upon the Armenians. How important this is, you can understand now when you try to explain the present condition that there is an Armenian state, there is an Armenian army, even in powerful Turkish army in their internal communications are explaining that it will be quite a problem to attack Armenia. They are equipped with the most modern weapons supplied by the Russians, and they have strategic training. There's a military academy, Armenian officers, and I think it will be very, very difficult, if not impossible task to be reckless and attack Armenia. So we have to understand this problem, the vulnerability of the Armenian population of the Ottoman Empire. Christians were not allowed to bear arms, not even knives. Just imagine how vulnerable the Armenians were. Turkish people who participated in massacres, some of them in their memoirs express atonement, astonishment. There's one description, it says, we went to an Armenian home and the men submitted themselves. He says, here, kill me. So defenseless, so vulnerable, and therefore so willing to offer themselves as sacrifice for massacre. Unbelievable. Men offering their necks, says, go ahead, kill me, because they are defenseless. So when you are vulnerable, something happens to the frame of mind, your psychology. You are defenseless, you become attuned, you reconcile yourself with the idea of dying. And I think this is a major problem in understanding the Armenian genocide. The vulnerability of the Armenian population wrought havoc with the Armenian genocide in terms of such a great success. I think in the history of humankind, no other mass murder can be compared to the Armenian in terms of the ease, the facility with which the Turks committed this great crime, the great massacre. Extremely easy. The Turks were even saying, my God, they won't even defend themselves. They are offering themselves to be killed. This is unheard of in human history. The vulnerability of the Armenians and the ease of the massacres with which the Armenian nation paid such a heavy price. Therefore, when we come again to reconsider the role of Salih Zeki, we can see again the recurrence, the repetition of the same pattern, parallel to the desire to kill the Armenians was this element of greed. I have come now in Turkish Ottoman archives new material which I had not received even before in my 30 years of research. That Salih, I was always asking myself why Salih Zeki was such a cruel, vicious man, killing so many. Of course, there was an explanation. His family suffered in the Balkan Peninsula. He lost family members against Greeks and Bulgarians. This is understandable. But now I have come across evidence suggesting that superseding this element of revenge on the part of Salih Zeki was that Salih Zeki was extremely greedy man. Acquisitiveness. He acquired such wealth from his Armenian victims that even Talat began to persecute him in 1918. That all this wealth you acquired belongs to the Ottoman state. And Salih Zeki, in order to avoid persecution, fled from Turkey. We don't know where he went. For 40 years I'm trying to trace him and I couldn't find in what country, towards what direction did he fly in 1918. He amassed extremely huge amounts of fortunes and Talat wanted to punish him. Isn't that interesting how greed, acquisitiveness becomes an overwhelming element in motivation, whereas in official historical books you say Armenians rebelled, we hated the Armenians, there was Christian-Muslim conflict. I repeat over and over again in my works that the economic element, the economic motivation or acquisitiveness was the paramount factor in the organization and implementation of the Armenian genocide. There was a massive transfer of wealth from the Armenians to the perpetrators. So, to wind up this lecture, because I was told to focus on Salih Zeki, I would say that the gap in terms of wealth and economic power between a perpetrator and the victim is a critical element. The bigger the discrepancy between the wealth of the victim population and the relative poverty of the perpetrator group can be a decisive factor in decision-making, organization, and execution of the Armenian genocide. This is why there is a movement now to gather Turkish documentation about transfer of wealth. What happened to the accumulated goods of the Armenians? And there is documentary evidence now that the group that most benefited from the Armenian genocide were the perpetrators themselves. I think we can better understand the Armenian genocide when we compare it to the Holocaust. In Holocaust, as in the Armenian genocide, the arch perpetrator group was not the state, the Ottoman state, and in Nazi Germany it was not the German government, but in both cases the arch perpetrators were two monolithic political parties. In Germany, it was not the German government, but the National Socialist Party, the Nazis, who conceived, organized, and executed the Holocaust. In the Armenian case, it was not the Ottoman government, but the political party, Ittihad Young Turk Party, that overwhelmed the Ottoman government, took control of all the agencies of the government, and imposed the will of the party upon the government. Therefore, I maintain that to understand the Armenian genocide, as if to understand the Holocaust, you have to shift your focus from the government agencies to strictly organized political party organizations. Ittihad Party had three components that were in charge of the Armenian genocide. At the lowest level, there were Takribi Mesud as his responsible secretary, Katibi Mesul. Then, upon them were the party secretaries, and at the top were the inspectors. Katibi Mesul, the organizers, and then the supervisors. Just like in the Nazi case, what I'm saying is that the understanding of the Armenian genocide requires focusing on these secret party organizations. How did they work? How were the orders transmitted to them? And here, in my latest work, I benefit immensely by studying the Nazi organization. I think the Nazis emulated the Turkish example, and I think Hitler indirectly admitted that he benefited from learning from the experience of the Turks. His famous statement about referring that about the Armenian, how the Armenian genocide remained unpunished. And we have evidence now that he studied the role of the Young Turk Ittihad Party in the organization of the Armenian genocide. And this is exactly what happened to the Jews. Not governmental agencies, but National Socialist Party levels, different levels, played a major role in organizing and executing the genocide. Therefore, I would like to say that in focusing on the role of Salih Zeki, my major contention is vindicated. Namely, even a fanatic Salih Zeki was subject to the predominance of economic motivations, self-enrichment. I was astounded, I repeat, I was astounded to find out that even the Ottoman government was trying to persecute Salih Zeki for the immense wealth he acquired to the massacre of the survivors of Deir Zor. And so, what we see here, we see here that when you have economic power, but you are utterly powerless politically and militarily, you become an ideal target. And I think this is the curse of Ottoman Armenian population. For 6 centuries, Armenians acquired wealth to their diligence, commerce, and industry, and always remained the envy of the dominant Muslim population. And when I see a comparison between the massacres of Abdülhamid era and the genocide of 1915, you see the striking parallel. Greed, acquisitiveness was as prominent during Abdülhamid massacres as in 1915. Armenian possessions, Armenian properties were the first target after the owners of these businesses and towns were massacred. Even there are incidents where Turks fought among themselves as to, after killing the Armenians, who would acquire the remaining properties of the Armenians. And so, what do we learn in terms of historical lesson? That it is very dangerous to be economically prosperous, but utterly vulnerable militarily and politically. And here I again come to one of my major conclusions, that I think the fact that the Ottoman Empire was based upon Islamic theocracy, Ottoman state was a theocratic state. It was ruled by the canons of Islam. And so when you are subject in a state system where the canons of Islam reduce the non-Muslims, the Christian populations, to the Ottoman was Raya. Raya means in English servile, servility. And I think Ottoman authorities frequently said, you Armenians, you are our servants, don't you raise your voice. This was the mentality of 6th century. Of course, in big cities, there was more tolerance and Armenians prospered. But very few Armenian historians recognize the fact that in the provinces, Armenian wealth was non-existent. And it existed for a very short time. They could not tolerate Armenians being prosperous. Think of it. The Turks are dominant, the Armenians are subject, a servile population, and yet they are living in comfort and prosperity. An anomaly by definition. So, my conclusion is that when we examine an arch perpetrator like Salih Zeki, we should not be misled by the fact that he was ferocious, that he hated the Armenians, he was a fanatic Muslim. Superseding all these motivations was his greed. He was after Armenian wealth, and as I said before, he acquired such inordinate wealth, which was okay with the Ottoman government, but the point at which he came in conflict with Talat Pasha was that instead of transferring this wealth to the Ottoman state, he acquired it. It became his personal wealth, and therefore he became persecuted by Talat. So, in conclusion, I would say that it was a miracle that for 6 centuries, Armenians were able to progress, to acquire comfortable wealth without realizing their vulnerability, that in critical moments they will be powerless to defend themselves. And when we examine the relationship between the massacres of Abdülhamid era, 1894-1896, and the Armenian genocide of 1915, some significant lessons can be learned. And I think it is my argument and conclusion that there is a very organic relationship between the massacres of 1894-96 and the genocide 1915. Two principles emerge in this relationship. Talat government learned with great satisfaction that Armenians were extremely vulnerable people, that they could do with the Armenians as they pleased because nobody would lift a finger. The big lesson of the Elhamid massacres was the vulnerability of the Armenian people. European powers protested, raised their voices, complained, but nobody not only tried to prevent, to stop the massacres, but even more significant, after 1960, no European government dared to challenge and take to task the Ottoman government for the big crime of massacres. Nothing happened. This is the curse of Armenian history, impunity. You can do with Armenians as you please, and you don't have to worry about the consequences. And I think, in my judgment, the Armenian genocide would be inconceivable and much less executable if there were punitive actions after the 1894-96 massacres. Impunity. This is the curse of Armenian history. And the main explanation for it is the absence of an Armenian nation state, totally defenseless. Of the Armenians with the Christian Greeks, the Turks hated even more the Greeks than the Armenians, but they had to reckon with the existence of a Greek state. So, in conclusion, I would say that the Armenian genocide and the role of Salih Seki has two principal elements around which we have to study and draw conclusions. Namely, the total vulnerability of the Armenian population and the consequences of the perpetrator, namely being immune from prosecution and punishment. I am reading now in several Turkish, there is a new generation of Turkish historians who are now recognizing my argument that were it the Armenian state, were the Armenians really protected by the European powers, the Ottoman Empire, neither Sultan Abdülhamid nor Talat would dare to pounce upon the Armenians. The greatest motivation, the greatest encouragement for these perpetrators was that they were persuaded that Armenians would be vulnerable and nobody would intervene. And in fact, at one point, several young Ittihadists warned Talat that the Turkish state will pay a huge price with this scheme of mass murder. And Talat said, go and study history. Nobody will lift a finger for the Armenians. So, I come again to my main argument that when we try to understand the motivation of the perpetrators, I think we should not be carried out with arguments of greed, the desire to get hold of the Armenian wealth, a transfer of wealth. Of the Armenian nationalism, Armenian provocation, Armenian treachery, betrayal, etc. That underlying all these arguments is the economic factor. That is, to reclaim the accumulated wealth of the victim population, the Armenians. And here, again, I say that this greed was also reinforced by a sense of envy. Namely, here we are, the dominant nation, Turks, and this subject slave minority is 10 times more prosperous than we are. Unbearable, unbearable. The dominant group is poverty-stricken and the subject nation is affluent. Of course, this is a misreading, this is a misinterpretation. Even though there were very wealthy Armenians in big cities, in Istanbul, on the Black Sea, Trabzon, Samsun, rich Armenian, but in the provinces, poverty-stricken Armenians exceeded poverty-stricken Turks. Armenian peasants were so poor, but this was not noticed. What was obvious and conspicuous was the wealthy Armenians in Istanbul, Trabzon, Izmir. They didn't see the poverty-stricken Armenian peasants suffering from all kinds of legal disabilities. So, again, I like to say that when we focus our attention on Salih Zeki, we should not be overwhelmed by savagery in terms of atrocity, but underlying that savagery was this greed, the economic element. In fact, Salih Zeki several times mentioned, you Armenians, you robbed our wealth. We, the dominant nation, are living in poverty. You Armenians are living in such comfort. I cannot stand that. This quotation I found just about 6 months ago. Very interesting that an arch perpetrator, Salih Zeki, finally admitting that he resented Armenian prosperity, that his hatred against Armenians was not just religious, but that economic motivations were at play in decision making. Thank you very much.
Was Salih Zeki. I expected you to elaborate more about his role as far as organizing the massacres in the desert. What kind of elements did he use? You mentioned very, you didn't concentrate so much on the Caucasian tribes, but from what I've gathered from my father, who was a survivor of the massacres, basically was saying he saw Chechens and Circassians. Could you elaborate more about the role of the Chechens, the Caucasian tribes, in the Mesopotamian and the Syrian desert as far as carrying out the massacres in the desert?
Terlap? Terlap?
Terlap?
No. Okay. I think I mentioned that these Circassians were victims themselves of Tsarist measures. The Tsarist regime displaced them. They were troublesome in the Caucasus, robbery, plunder. So late 1900, the Tsar decided to expel them, and tens of thousands of Circassians migrated, compulsory migration from Caucasus to the eastern provinces of Turkey. And the Ottoman Empire didn't know how to handle them. And, but they decided that they may take advantage of the situation, and knowing that these people were dispossessed and very brigand type of people. Circassians are by nature brigand type people, brigandage. That's why the Tsarist regime wanted to get rid of them. So the Sultan deliberately organized their concentration on Armenian big Armenian centers of population, Erzurum, Erzincan, Bitlis, Muş, and Van. It's very interesting that before this influx of Circassians, late 1900, Armenians were in a peaceful relationship with the Muslim population, the Turks. This population movement created a new situation, changed the balance of relationships, and because by nature they were brigand type people, for the first time in Ottoman history, the prosperous Armenian population became subject to plunder, brigandage, and even murder. And this is how the Turco-Armenian conflict began. As I said before, in the eastern provinces, there were very few Turks living. Most of the Muslims were Kurdish people. And so, all of a sudden, the normal life conditions of hundreds of thousands of Armenians living in these 6 provinces became in jeopardy because of the brigandage of these new immigrants, the Circassians. And as a result, the Turkish government, parallel to the rise of Armenian revolutionary movements in 1918, first the Henchaks, then the Tashnaks, Abdülhamit thought that the best way to deal with these Armenian revolutionaries is to use the Circassians and Kurds as an antidote against Armenian revolutionaries. And therefore, it's very important that population movements, population statistics played a major role in the aggravation of the Turco-Armenian conflict. And I maintain that Turco-Armenian conflict, in essence, was a Turco-Kurdish conflict, because there were very few Turkish population in the provinces, except for government officials, and it was mainly a conflict between Armenians and Kurds. So my observation is that to understand the Armenian genocide, we have to understand the nature and dimensions of Turco-Armenian conflict and how they were exploited by the Ottoman governmental authorities to, and I think that the population movement, that is the transfer of Circassians from the Caucasus to eastern Anatolia, is another factor that in the Armenian genocide, demographic factor is a very important consideration. In other words, we cannot analyze the Armenian genocide without understanding these population movements. And I think Abdülhamit, in one of his personal essays, which I got hold of recently from the Ottoman archives, Abdülhamit, in a personal, once in a while, he wrote down his thoughts and his reflections. And in that reflection, he says that the Armenian population in the 6 provinces is a major threat to the existence of the Ottoman Empire, and we have to do everything we can to increase the ratio of Kurdish populations in the 6 provinces. So in late 1900s, there was a Turkish plan, very explicit plan, to change the demographic picture of Erzurum, Van, Bitlis. In other words, for the first time, majority Armenians became minority Armenians by the influx of the Kurds. And here you see how in the study of the Armenian genocide, demographic factor is an important consideration. That when you change the ratio of populations, you create new elements of conflict. And therefore, I think in the study of Armenian genocide, demographics has been neglected thus far. I think we have to understand that in the study of democratic factor, the Kurdish element is indispensable for analysis and further study. And I repeat again what I said previously. I think in the Armenian genocide, more than Turkish authorities, the most responsible element was the Kurdish element. It is inconceivable to analyze the genocide without focusing on the role of the Kurds in terms of not organization but implementation of the Armenian genocide. Most massacres were carried out by Kurdish people, not the Turks. Because of very negligible Turkish population in these cities.
I just want to take a minute on behalf of my family, the Eskesian family, to thank Dr. Dadrian, who is an international personality, for coming to California, for coming to Mission Hills, being here today, sharing your life, sharing your history with all of us. We are deeply, deeply honored.